Greetings, my name is Kerry and welcome back to my channel. Today I have my June wrap up for you. I can't believe we're past halfway through the year already. Where did that time go? Flippin' heck. I read a total of 6 books. I completed a total of 6 books in June, I should say, because I was taking part in the Currently Reading-a-thon. So I have a number of books that are still ongoing from that, which I'm going to film a separate wrap up, just focusing on where I'm at with those books that you heard me talk about in my Currently Reading-a-thon TBR. But I actually managed to finish 6 books, and 5 of those were ones that were on my Currently Reading-a-thon TBR, so I'm pretty happy with that. I did also DNF one book. Of those books, 2 were from my owned TBR and 4 were books that I bought this year. 2 of them were non-fiction and 1 was a collection of poetry. And in terms of my challenges, I actually did alright with this as well. So as I mentioned, 5 of the books were for the Currently Reading-a-thon, so that was really good to get them off my Currently Reading shelf. 1 book also counted towards Read Around the World, so I ticked off another country for that, and that was Vietnam. And 3 books met goals for the Indie Challenge Draft. I DNF 1 book, I gave 1 book 3 stars, I gave 3 books 4 stars and 2 books 5 stars, so it's fairly successful reading month as they go. So I'm just going to go into talking about the books now. So I'll start with the one that I DNF'd. I don't actually have it anymore because I unhauled it, and actually my mum's taken it because she wanted to give it a read. So that was Sisterland by Curtis Sittenfeld. So there were various reasons why I DNF'd this one. I can't remember when it was published and I meant to check but I've forgotten, but I think it was around the 2012 mark. But some of the attitudes in it felt a little bit dated, so that was one of the reasons I DNF'd it. It's about these twin sisters who have this sort of vague psychic ability, and it's about how their lives have diverged. It's all told from the perspective of one of the twins, Kate, and part of it is present day and part of it is her reflecting on growing up with her sister Violet. The present day stuff had some sort of questionable attitudes that weren't really addressed in the bit that I read. I gave up about page 150. It's about a 500-page book. At the start of the story, Violet has decided to date women, whereas previously she was dating men. So essentially she's bisexual, but that's not really like even mentioned that could be what has happened. And Kate's attitude towards it is that Violet has suddenly decided she's gonna become a lesbian because she's too fat to attract men anymore. It's kind of the perspective that she's going for. She says something along the lines of, Violet's put on a bit of weight recently and women are more sympathetic to that than men would be, so it'd be easier for her to find a partner if she dates women. So that came across as both fatphobic and homophobic to me, and it wasn't addressed in the text at the point that I got to. Maybe it is later. So it was a bit like, that attitude doesn't sit well with me. It made me a bit uncomfortable to read that. And then the other reason why I DNF'd it was because it just got a bit boring. The premise was really interesting to me and I wanted to know more about it, and so I did kind of, part of me wanted to keep reading it, but like the style of writing was just so detail heavy and unnecessary details that didn't fit in, like they didn't serve the purpose of the story, they didn't drive the plot forward. So it was things like every time they had a meal we were told exactly what they were eating. I'm like, I don't need to know this, just tell me they're having a meal. Like, it doesn't need that much detail, and it just got a bit boring. It really slowed the pace of the novel down. It was so slow paced and I was just, yeah, bored. And Kate was really irritating as well as the character, and I gave up at the point where she started blaming herself for everything that had gone wrong in her sister's life. And like, get over yourself. Like, she ruined her own life, don't take any credit for it. Yeah, it would have been interesting to see how it turned out, and maybe if my mum reads it, if she enjoys it, I might give it another try at some point, who knows. But for now it's gone. I've given up. Okay, so on to some more positive things, onto the books that I did finish. So the book that I gave 3 stars to was called The Christian Priest Today by Michael Ramsey. This one I was reading, it was recommended to me as sort of a bit of an insight into the Anglican Church and the role of the priest in that, because I go to an Anglican church but my background is very much not Anglican. I enjoyed bits of this. It took me a really long time to read it. I started this like a year ago and it's only quite a short book, and that was because it's quite dry in places. It feels a little dated. So it was written, it was first published in 1972 and then revised in 1985. So it was written before they started ordaining women to be priests in the Anglican Church, and so anytime it refers to a priest it's always in the male. This edition was reissued in 2009 and it's been reprinted a lot of times. It's considered a classic, and I think Michael Ramsey's passed away now, so I don't see how it would hurt next time they reissue it to like make the language gender neutral, because we have women bishops these days, we have women priests, they're really common. And this book is recommended to anyone that is looking into ordination who wants to become a priest. I would think it'd be really off-putting to some people, partly because of that language, but never mind. Like, there was some really good stuff in there, but it just did generally feel a little bit dated, and it was quite heavy. I think originally all of the chapters in this book were short sermons Michael Ramsey gave at ordination ceremonies, so I think if I'd heard them, maybe if there were an audiobook version, I might have engaged with it a bit more. I don't know. It was quite a dry read, but not unenjoyable. I was making notes as I went along, and there were certainly some quotes that I wrote down. I'm keeping it. I don't usually keep books I go 3 stars to, but I'm keeping it because it might be useful for reference in the future, and I might dip into it again at some point. And so on to my 4-star reads, and there are 3 of these. The first one was Moon Fevers, which is a collection of poems translated from the Vietnamese, and the author is Thuyēn. I looked it up how to pronounce it. This is published by Tilted Axis Press. I contributed to the Kickstarter that funded the publication of these little books. They're a really great little series. This is the second one I've read, and it's really eye-opening to read poems from another country, so I really enjoyed these. It was a bit weird in places, which is why it was 4 stars, not 5, but ultimately really enjoyable, and it's such a cute little book. I've got 2 more to go in the series, so I'm really looking forward to picking those up as well. If you've never tried foreign poetry, like, give it a try. I really recommend this series from Tilted Axis, but just have a look into it because it is really interesting to see the world from a different perspective by reading translated works, so really highly recommend getting stuck into some translated literature. So next I finished my Miss Marple Volume 2 Omnibus. I only had 1 story left to go in this, and that was A Caribbean Mystery, which is actually, I think, it's quite high on my list of the Marple series so far. I really enjoyed that one. Miss Marple's been given a holiday to the Caribbean by her generous nephew to help her because she's suffered from pneumonia, and so he wants to give her a chance to go to a warmer climate for a little bit, and of course someone gets murdered because Miss Marple's there, so it's gonna happen. The construction of this plot was really clever, really interesting premise. There's this older chap who is a Major Palgrave, I think was his name. Yeah, Major Palgrave, and he likes to tell stories about his life, some of which are true, some of which aren't. He's telling Miss Marple a story about how he has a picture of a murderer in his wallet, and he's about to show Miss Marple this picture when he stops suddenly and puts the picture away, and the next day he's murdered. Well, no one else thinks he's been murdered, everyone thinks it was natural causes, but Miss Marple thinks he was murdered, and she thinks he was murdered because he recognised the person in the photo as being someone else staying at the hotel, and sort of the plot evolves from there. And actually this was a really great premise. I thought the outworking was really clever. There's sort of a sense of you don't quite know who's telling the truth, who to believe, because all these people have been put together. She actually talks about it. Marple at one point in the novel says to someone, oh, you know, you only know what these people have said about themselves, you don't know if they're actually telling you the truth because you're all isolated in context here. You don't have any way of verifying if what this person you've just met has told you is true or not. So I thought it was quite a clever concept and a good execution, actually, compared to the next one I read where the execution was maybe not quite so good. There's something about sort of as Agatha Christie aged, her novels didn't quite fit together so well, and this was certainly better than The Mirror Cracked in terms of, in some of them she relies a little bit too heavily on coincidence, but this one I thought was really, really effective. So this book had A Caribbean Mystery, A Pocket Full of Rye, The Mirror Cracked, From Side to Side, and They Do It With Mirrors. I've now read all of those, so this book is finished, and overall each of those stories I gave 4 stars to. I think The Mirror Cracked was about a 3.5, but I really enjoyed all of the ones in this book, so overall I've given this book 4 stars. I am hoping to get individual copies of all of these novels at some point so that I don't have them in the omnibus edition because they're not in the right order and it's really annoying. So at some point I will get individual copies of them because I've really enjoyed this Marple read along and I want to reread them all at some point. And then the last book I gave 4 stars to was Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. I have finally finished it. This is my cute little copy I got in Hail My. So I actually started reading Oliver Twist in January in my old omnibus edition. I then got this cute little copy at the beginning of March and had just sort of been putting it off and I hadn't really got into it. So I just knuckled down and finished it off this month and I really enjoyed it. It was actually the first time I read it. I'm quite familiar with the story from various adaptations and now I want to rewatch some of those adaptations to see what bits they missed out and why. There's a lot more to the story than I realised. I think because of that, a lot more characters that I don't remember being in any of the adaptations before. So overall I really enjoyed this. It's a really good portrait of Victorian London and that's one of the things I love about Dickens. This one is sort of has moments of his social action preachiness but not too many, but the only thing that didn't quite sit right with me and kept this from being 5 stars was the attitude towards the character of Fagin, who is quite a famous character in literature. I hadn't realised how anti-Jewish the portrayal of him was in the novel. He's referred to as often as the Jew as he is referred to as Fagin, and it's sort of part of this general stereotype of Jews at the time, that they're sort of a bit underhand, a bit untrustworthy, a bit criminal, which I don't think was a fair portrayal even at the time, and certainly is not acceptable now. That didn't quite sit right with me, but other than that, it was a very good story. If you haven't read it, then it is totally worth a read. But I would say actually it's easier to follow the story with a book like this if you are vaguely familiar with it, so maybe check out some of the adaptations first. I plan to do a video talking a bit more about my thoughts on the book and some of the different adaptations of it, so hopefully that'll be coming to you soon. Keep your eyes open for that. Okay, and on to my 5 stars. There are 2 5-star books that I read this month. The first of these was inspired by Rachel Held Evans. So I talked a bit about my discovery of Rachel Held Evans through the very sad circumstance of her passing away at the beginning of May. I was vaguely aware of her before that, but since then I've just sort of been trying to get to some of her books. So I read this one, I finished this in June, and I really loved it. Her writing style is so beautiful. This is non-fiction, by the way. This is a little bit of an overview of the Bible and some of its contents that are maybe less user-friendly is not the right word. What's the word I'm thinking of? There's quite a lot of bits in the Bible that are difficult to read, shall we put it that way. There's stories of injustice and of wars and of patriarchy, and you know, the Bible doesn't pass the Bechdel test. This was sort of Rachel Held Evans trying to come to terms with the Bible, that she was raised with it being sort of presented as a toolbox for life, which is similar to my upbringing, and as an adult sort of coming to terms with some of the bits of the Bible that are not so comforting or not so easy to read or are not patterns for how we should live today, because there are bits that you think actually you should not be applying that to your daily life today. I found it really encouraging as someone from a similar background, and particularly coming from a Christian feminist perspective of actually the Bible's not that nice to women in some places. So this was really a really good read for me. What I really liked as well was the sort of essay chapters. She interspersed them with retellings of some Bible stories in different formats. So there's one that's a really fun one which is done a bit like a play, and there's some that are done as sort of poetry. There's a choose your own adventure story in there, just short stories that are retellings of Bible stories to introduce the different essay chapters. So I just thought this was really beautiful. I've got a few more of her books to pick up, so I don't know if I'm going to read one this month, but I probably will pick one up in August. So I'm just really sad that it took me so long to get around to reading her books. But now that I have, I want to just keep reading and rereading them. And then finally, the last book that I read in June that I gave 5 stars to was The Magician's Lie by Greer Macallister. This was our Ninja Book Club pick for the month, and I think everyone that read it really enjoyed it. It was not quite what I was expecting. I thought it would be quite a straightforward murder mystery story. So the premise is a famous female magician at the beginning of the 20th century. One night after her act, her husband is found murdered and suspicion immediately falls on her, and she's arrested by a young police officer who's trying to prove himself, and then she starts telling him her story. So I thought it was going to be a fairly standard murder mystery, but just maybe with a bit of a magical element to it. And there was that aspect to it, but actually there was a lot more to it than that. The magician's called the Amazing Arden, and she starts retelling her whole life story to this young police officer. So that is interspersed with scenes at the police station of him interrogating, questioning her about what happened on the night. And he keeps trying to come back to what happened on the night, and she keeps telling him her life story to try and set the scene for what happened on the night. I absolutely loved this book. I thought it was beautifully written. I was a bit worried to start with because the present day sections were told in third person present tense, which I don't usually like, but actually it really worked because the past section were told in first person past tense, so it really made a clear distinction between this is present day, that is past, which I thought really worked. It was really engaging, so really enjoyed that. I do need to give content warnings for this book. It has domestic violence in it and attempted sexual assault and self-harm as well as the other one. So yeah, if you're sensitive to those things, maybe go into this cautiously, but it's definitely really worth a read. Yeah, so that was all of the books. I forgot to mention as I was going through them which books met indie challenges, so I'm just going to go through that quickly now. So Moon Fever's the poetry book met 4 challenges. It was an author from another country, it was crowdfunded, a poetry collection and a translated book. The Christian Priest Today met 2 challenges, which was a press over 20 years old and non-fiction. And The Magician's Lie met 4 challenges, which was author from another country, new to you press, a debut and a book that defies genre, because it was kind of historical fiction, kind of murder mystery with a hint of magical realism in there, so it just hit a lot of boxes for me. Really enjoyable. I'm going to do a separate video about my currently reading-a-thon wrap-up, and I'm going to talk about some of the books I'm currently reading in that. So I'm just going to mention here a couple of books that I'm hoping to get to this month. One of them is my next book for my Book Death Row, so if you've seen my Book Death Row update, I'm now picking one book at random per month to try and read in that month, get them off Book Death Row, make them a decision about them, and I have the choice of DNFing them or reading them and then make a decision about them. So my first book for this is Silver Bay by Jojo and Moyes. I read the first chapter of this a while back and it was one that intrigued me enough that I wanted to carry on going with it, so I'm going to try and get to that this month. And then our Ninja Book Club book pick for this month is How Not to Be a Boy by Robert Webb, which I actually read last year, so I haven't bought a copy of it, but I'm going to be getting out from the library so that I can have a quick reread of it to join in the discussion at the end of the month. I haven't definitely decided whether I'm going to reread the whole book or just sort of skim read and quickly read through it so that I can join in that discussion, but it was definitely an enjoyable book. It's just not one that I'm going to reread multiple times, so I didn't want to buy a copy when my library has it. So that is all for this video. Let me know what some of your favourite books in June were. Have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? There's still time to enter my giveaway as well, so I'm going to link down to my Not a BookTube Newbie anniversary video and you can join in my giveaway, so you can go and check that video out. I'll leave the link down in the description box. Also in the description box are all my social media details, so you can go and check me out on social media, friend me on Goodreads, that sort of thing. So that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching and I will talk to you again soon. Bye!